April 1940. In the pre-dawn darkness of the Oslo fjord, the pride of the German Navy, the heavy cruiser Blücher, glided through the fog. On board was a shadow government and the elite personnel intended to manage a conquered Norway. The Germans were confident. They believed the Norwegians were unprepared, their weapons relics of a bygone era. They were half right. Waiting in the darkness of the Oscarborg fortress was Colonel Birger Eriksen, a man 64 years old and months away from retirement. He commanded two massive Krupp cannons cast in the late 19th century. As the silhouettes of the massive cruiser emerged from the mist, Eriksen's subordinates hesitated. Standing orders required warning shots. Eriksen did not hesitate. He looked at his men and said, "Either I will be decorated or I will be court-martialed." Fire. The shells from those Victorian-era guns, followed by 40-year-old torpedoes, tore into the Blücher, sending 1,000 men and the German plan for a clean occupation to the bottom of the fjord. This single act of defiance did not stop the invasion, but it bought the Norwegian king, the government, and the nation's gold reserves a few precious hours to escape. It transformed a lightning coup into a 62-day campaign that would eventually break the back of the German surface fleet and alter the course of the Second World War. To understand why Hitler would launch what he called the rashest undertaking in the history of modern warfare, we must look at a map. In 1940, Germany was a machine that ran on Swedish iron ore. 9 million tons of it traveled every year through the ice-free Norwegian ports of Narvik. For the British, this was a strategic jugular vein. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, was obsessed with cutting it. The Altmark incident, where British sailors boarded a German ship in Norwegian waters to rescue prisoners, convinced Hitler that Norwegian neutrality was a thin veil that the Allies would tear down at any moment. He decided he had to strike first. The planning of Operation Weserübung was an exercise in pure audacity. General Nicholas von Falkenhorst was given just 24 hours to draft the invasion of two sovereign nations. He had no secret intelligence files and no military maps of the Norwegian coast. Instead, he went to a local shop and bought a Baedeker tourist guidebook from the 1920s. Using those pages, he mapped out a simultaneous strike on 6 major ports. It was a plan built on speed, deception, and the hope that the neutral Nords would not fight. On April 9th, the hammer fell. Denmark, flat and vulnerable, realized the futility of resistance and surrendered in a mere 6 hours. But Norway was a different world. While the Blücher burned in the south, 10 German destroyers successfully seized Narvik in the north. However, the German triumph was lived short. The Royal Navy responded with a ferocity that caught the German command off guard. In 2 brutal naval engagements, the British battleship Warspite and its escorts cornered and destroyed all 10 German destroyers in the Narvik fjords. Hitler's elite mountain troops were left stranded on the shore, cut off from the sea, and forced into a bitter struggle in the frozen peaks. Behind the front lines, a different kind of war was beginning. It was a war of codes and secrets. At Bletchley Park, British cryptographers had just achieved a massive triumph, breaking the German Enigma key used for the Norwegian invasion. They were reading the Luftwaffe's plans in real time. But in a tragic irony of military history, the British command was not yet prepared to use these golden eggs. There were no secure channels to get the information to the commanders in the field. The intelligence was there, but the maps and the radios were not. British soldiers arrived in Norway with the wrong equipment, lacking skis, transport, and even basic maps of the mountains they were meant to defend. As the military campaign faltered, Hitler turned to a man whose name would become a global synonym for traitor. Vidkun Quisling, leader of a fringe Norwegian fascist party that had never won a single seat in parliament, seized the radio station in Oslo and declared himself prime minister. He expected the nation to follow. Instead, he was met with a wall of silence. King Haakon VII, fleeing through the mountains as German bombers leveled the villages behind him, issued a resounding no to the German demands. He declared he would rather abdicate the throne than appoint Quisling. This refusal became the heartbeat of the Norwegian soul. This was not just a war for territory, it was a battle for the very future of humanity. In the quiet valley of Telemark, at a plant called Vemork, the Germans had seized the world's only source of heavy water, a critical component for nuclear research.
While Hitler's generals focused on the ports, his scientists were eyeing the ingredients for an atomic bomb. The forgotten campaign of Norway was in reality the first chapter of the nuclear age. The occupation would last for 5 long years, but the Norwegian people practiced a quiet, devastating form of resistance. It became known as the paperclip spirit. Simple office paperclips were worn on lapels as a secret symbol of unity, a sign that they were bound together against the occupier. The most remarkable defiance came from the teachers. When the Quisling regime tried to force them to teach Nazi ideology, 12,000 of the 14,000 teachers signed a letter of protest. Hundreds were rounded up and sent to concentration camps in the Arctic Circle. They were starved and forced into hard labor, but they did not break. Their courage forced the regime to back down, proving that even under the boot of a superpower, a moral no could hold the line. When the final Allied ships evacuated Norway in June 1940, Hitler appeared to be the victor. He had secured his iron ore, but the cost was hidden. The Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, had been decimated. They lost 10% of their transport fleet and nearly all of their modern destroyers. This loss was so severe that it effectively ended any hope of Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Great Britain. Without a fleet to protect his transports, Hitler could not cross the English Channel. In the final tally, Norway was a secondary theater that produced primary consequences. Hitler was forced to keep 300,000 soldiers garrisoned in the Norwegian mountains until the very end of the war, soldiers who were desperately needed in Normandy and on the Eastern Front. The campaign that began with a tourist guidebook and an old man's defiance ended by draining the lifeblood of the Third Reich. It reminds us that in history, there is no such thing as a small victory, and the weight of a nation's conscience is often heavier than its armor.